courtroom camera captured the exact moment when everything fell apart. Karen Stevens sat in the plaintiff's chair, her designer handbag clutched like a shield, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against the wooden armrest as Judge Judy reviewed the case file. With that expression, regular viewers knew meant someone was about to get destroyed. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, but Karen seemed oblivious to the danger she was in. She had walked into America's toughest courtroom believing this would be an easy victory, a simple case of making her neighbor pay for damages that she absolutely deserved. What she didn't know was that her own husband was sitting in the third row of the gallery, and he had already made a decision that would not only cost her the case, but would detonate her entire life on national television in front of millions of viewers. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. What transforms it from just another small claims dispute into the most viral courtroom moment of the year. This wasn't going to be Judge Judy who destroyed Karen's case. It wasn't going to be the defendant's lawyer or some surprise witness. The person who would completely obliterate Karen's lawsuit, expose her lies, and humiliate her in front of the entire country was the one man she thought would always have her back, no matter what. Her husband, Michael, a respected corporate attorney who had spent 15 years married to this woman, was about to stand up in that courtroom and do something so shocking, so unprecedented that even Judge Judy herself would be left momentarily speechless. And what he revealed in those devastating 47 seconds would not only lose Karen $12,000, it would cost her everything she had spent years building. Picture this scene carefully, because you need to understand just how confident Karen was walking into this disaster. She had spent 3 years waging a calculated campaign against her neighbor, Linda Chin. 3 years of complaints, harassment, and manufactured disputes, all because Linda refused to sell her property to Karen at a price far below market value. Karen wanted to expand her backyard, wanted to build the pool and entertainment area she'd been dreaming about, and Linda's modest home stood exactly where Karen's Pinterest perfect vision demanded it should be removed. When Hurricane Beatrice swept through their Connecticut suburbs 6 months ago, dropping a massive oak tree from Linda's yard onto Karen's luxury SUV, Karen saw her opportunity. Not just an opportunity for a new car, but a chance to financially destroy Linda Chen so completely that she'd have no choice but to sell her home and disappear from the neighborhood forever. Karen had filed a lawsuit demanding $12,000, claiming that Linda had negligently maintained a diseased and dangerous tree that any responsible property owner would have removed years ago. She told Judge Judy that the tree had obvious signs of rot and decay, that Linda had been warned multiple times by neighbors about the danger, and that this disaster was entirely preventable if Linda had just done the responsible thing. Her testimony was delivered with the kind of righteous indignation that only someone who truly believes in their own victimhood can muster. She described in vivid detail how the tree had crushed her Mercedes SUV, how traumatized she had been by the sound of splitting wood and shattering glass, how she had suffered nightmares about what could have happened if she had been in the vehicle at the time. Judge Judy listened with that patient expression that experienced viewers recognized as the calm before the storm, asking seemingly innocent questions about the condition of the tree, about any inspections or expert opinions, about the actual damage to the vehicle. That's when Karen made her first crucial mistake. When Judge Judy asked directly whether she had any professional assessment of the tree's condition before the storm, Karen rolled her eyes in that condescending way entitled people do when they think someone is asking a stupid question. She actually sighed dramatically before responding that she didn't need some expensive expert to tell her what was obvious to anyone with functioning eyesight. The tree was rotting, it was dangerous, and Linda Chen was negligent. Period. Judge Judy's eyebrow raised slightly, that telltale sign that she had just caught someone in a lie or a trap, and Karen was too arrogant to even notice the shift in atmosphere. She continued digging her own grave, explaining that people like Linda, who don't maintain their properties properly, shouldn't be allowed to live in nice neighborhoods, that property values suffer when irresponsible owners refuse to take care of dangerous situations, and that this lawsuit was really about teaching Linda a lesson about accountability and responsibility. The defendant, Linda Chen, sat quietly in her chair, looking exhausted and defeated. This 62-year-old widow had been dealing with Karen's harassment for 3 solid years, and the weight of it showed in every line of her face. She had brought a simple folder of documents to defend herself, and when Judge Judy asked her to explain her side, Linda's voice was soft and resigned. She explained that the tree had been healthy, that she had maintained her property carefully, and that the storm that knocked it down had produced winds exceeding 80 feet. It was an act of God, a natural disaster that no one could have prevented or predicted. Karen actually laughed out loud at this testimony, a sharp, mocking sound that made several audience members gasp at the disrespect. That's when Judge Judy's expression hardened into something dangerous. And that's when Michael Stevens, sitting in the 3rd row with his head in his hands, made his decision. He couldn't let this continue. He couldn't watch his wife commit perjury on national television. He couldn't be complicit in fraud any longer. He stood up, and the entire trajectory of the case, of their marriage, of multiple lives, changed forever in that single moment. The movement in the gallery was so sudden, so unexpected, that it momentarily froze everyone in the courtroom. Michael Stevens rose from his seat with the kind of deliberate, measured movement that spoke of a man who had wrestled with this decision for weeks and had finally reached the point of no return. His 6'2" frame commanded attention as he stood there in his expensive suit, looking every inch the successful attorney he was. And when he cleared his throat to speak, the sound cut through the tension like a gunshot. Judge Judy's head snapped toward him with laser focus, her expression shifting from irritation at the interruption to curiosity about what could possibly be important enough for an audience member to stand during active proceedings. Karen turned in her chair, and the moment she saw her husband standing there, her face went through a rapid series of expressions that the cameras captured in perfect detail. First confusion, then a flicker of hope that maybe Michael was going to support her testimony, then something darker as she recognized the expression on his face. "Your Honor," Michael said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. "May I say something to this court?" Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, that slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth that regular viewers knew meant she sensed something significant was about to happen. She had presided over thousands of cases in her decades on the bench, and she had developed an almost supernatural instinct for when the truth was about to emerge from unexpected places. "Mr. Stevens," she said, because she had already glanced at the case file and knew exactly who this man was. "You're not a party to this case. You're sitting in the gallery as a spectator. What could you possibly have to contribute that would be relevant to these proceedings?" Michael took a deep breath, and in that pause, Karen's whispered plea of "Michael, no," carried clearly through the courtroom microphones. Her voice already tinged with panic because she knew her husband well enough to recognize when he had reached a breaking point. "Your Honor," Michael continued, ignoring his wife's desperate attempt to silence him, "I'm an attorney with Morrison and Blake in Hartford, and I have information that is directly relevant to this case. Information that goes to the heart of the plaintiff's credibility and the validity of her claims. I believe the court needs to hear the truth before rendering a judgment that would be based on false testimony and fraudulent evidence." The courtroom erupted in murmurs at this declaration, and Judge Judy raised her hand for silence, her eyes never leaving Michael's face as she evaluated whether to allow this highly irregular intervention. Karen had gone pale, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist, as she realized that her own husband was about to testify against her in front of millions of viewers. She grabbed at his sleeve as he moved toward the front of the courtroom, but he gently pulled away from her grasp, his face set in an expression of grim determination. Judge Judy made her decision quickly. Mr. Stevens approached the bench. I want to know exactly what you think is so important that you're willing to interrupt these proceedings and apparently testify against your own wife. Michael walked down the aisle with steady steps, and Judge Judy gestured for him to stand where he could address the court properly. The bailiff moved closer, uncertain about protocol for this unprecedented situation, but Judge Judy waved him back slightly. She wanted to hear what this man had to say, because in her extensive experience, when a spouse was willing to publicly contradict their partner in a legal proceeding, the truth was usually about to emerge in a spectacular fashion. Michael stood before the bench and began speaking with the clear, measured tones of someone who had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times, but was still struggling with the emotional weight of what he was doing. Your Honor, my wife's testimony today has not been truthful. The tree that fell on our vehicle during Hurricane Beatrice was not diseased, was not rotting, and was not dangerous. I know this for a fact because 3 months before the storm, Karen insisted that we have the tree inspected by a certified arborist. She was already planning this harassment campaign against Linda Chen, already looking for ways to force our neighbor to sell her property. And she thought if she could prove the tree was dangerous, she could use it as leverage. The courtroom went dead silent except for Karen's sharp intake of breath. Michael continued, his voice growing stronger as the truth poured out. The arborist, a man named Dr. Robert Martinez from Hartford Tree Services, conducted a thorough examination of that oak tree. He provided a detailed report stating that the tree was completely healthy, structurally sound, and posed no danger to surrounding properties. He gave Linda Chen a clean bill of health certificate for that tree, and I have a copy of that report right here. Michael pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket, and Judge Judy's eyebrows rose as she gestured for him to hand it over. Karen stood up from her chair, her voice rising to a near shriek as she screamed, "Michael, what are you doing? You're destroying everything." "Sit down," Judge Judy commanded, her voice cracking like a whip, and Karen collapsed back into her seat as if her legs had given out. Beneath her, Judge Judy examined the document Michael had provided, her expression growing more severe with each line she read. "Mr. Stevens," she said carefully, "you're telling this court that your wife not only knew this tree was healthy, but that she has knowingly committed perjury today by claiming it was diseased and dangerous." Michael nodded, and the weight of that gesture seemed to physically hurt him. "Yes, Your Honor, and there's more you need to know about why this lawsuit was really filed, and what my wife has been doing to Linda Chen for the past 3 years. The transformation in the courtroom atmosphere was total and complete. What had started as a straightforward property damage case had just exploded into something far more serious, and everyone present understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. Karen sat frozen in her chair, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly as she tried to process the betrayal of her husband's testimony. Linda Chen looked up with the first glimmer of hope she had felt in months, realizing that vindication might actually be possible. And Judge Judy leaned forward with the focused intensity of a predator that had just spotted weakness in its prey, ready to extract every detail of the truth that had been hidden beneath Karen's lies. Judge Judy's voice cut through the shocked silence with surgical precision. "Mr. Stevens, I want you to explain to this court exactly what you mean by that statement. What has your wife been doing to Miss Chen for the past 3 years? And I want to remind you that you are speaking under the penalty of perjury, even though this is not a formal criminal proceeding. Everything you say here is being recorded and can be used against you or your wife in future legal actions. Do you understand that?" Michael nodded solemnly, his jaw set in that way that showed he had fully committed to this path, and there would be no turning back now. "Your Honor, I understand completely, and that's precisely why I'm here. I took an oath when I became an attorney to uphold the law and pursue justice, and I cannot sit silently while my wife commits fraud in my name using funds from our joint accounts to pursue a lawsuit that I explicitly told her not to file. The revelation hit the courtroom like a physical force. Karen let out a sound that was half gasp and half sob, her hands flying to cover her mouth, as if she could somehow take back what her husband had just revealed. But Michael was just getting started, and the floodgates had opened on 3 years of secrets, manipulation, and harassment that he had witnessed with growing horror. Your Honor, my wife has been waging a systematic campaign of harassment against Linda Chin ever since we moved into our neighborhood 4 years ago. Karen wanted to buy Linda's property so she could expand our backyard and build an entertainment area she had been planning. Linda's home sits on a beautiful corner lot with mature trees and a small garden that Linda's late husband planted before he passed away. Linda politely declined Karen's initial offers because that home represents her last connection to her husband, and she has no intention of selling it at any price. Judge Judy listened intently, making notes while Michael continued his devastating testimony. When Linda refused to sell, Karen became obsessed with forcing her out of the neighborhood. She started with complaints to the Homeowners Association, claiming that Linda's garden violated community standards, even though dozens of other homes had similar landscaping. When that didn't work, she called code enforcement repeatedly, filing false reports about everything from overgrown grass to supposed structural violations. Every single complaint was investigated and dismissed because Linda maintains her property beautifully. Karen then escalated to calling the police, claiming at various times that Linda was threatening her, that Linda's visitors were suspicious and possibly dealing drugs, and that Linda was violating noise ordinances with parties that never actually happened. I know this because I reviewed the police reports after officers came to our door asking Karen to stop filing false complaints. The audience members were audibly gasping now, and several were shaking their heads in disbelief at the scope of harassment Michael was describing. Linda Chen sat with tears streaming down her face, finally having someone validate the nightmare she had been living through for years. Karen had shrunk down in her chair. Her earlier arrogance completely evaporated as her husband systematically dismantled the facade she had constructed. Michael's voice carried a note of shame as he continued, "Your Honor, I am deeply ashamed that I did not stop this sooner. I told myself that Karen would eventually give up, that she would realize how wrong her behavior was, but I was enabling her by my silence. When Hurricane Beatrice hit 6 months ago and that tree fell on our Mercedes, I actually felt relieved at first because I thought it would give Karen something else to focus on besides tormenting our neighbor. The insurance company covered most of the damage, and we received a check for $11,000 to repair the vehicle." Judge Judy's eyes narrowed dangerously. So the vehicle was already paid for by insurance. Michael nodded miserably. "Yes, Your Honor. The SUV was repaired 2 months ago and is sitting in our driveway right now. This lawsuit is not about recovering damages for a destroyed vehicle. This lawsuit is about financially destroying Linda Chin." Karen calculated that even if Linda won the case, the legal fees and stress of defending herself would push her towards selling her home just to escape the harassment. And when I discovered that Karen had filed this lawsuit without telling me, using funds from our joint account to pay the filing fees, I knew I had reached my breaking point. I confronted her 2 weeks ago and told her she needed to drop this case immediately. She refused. She told me that Linda deserved everything she was getting and more. The courtroom had become so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning was clearly audible. Judge Judy looked at Michael with an expression that mixed respect for his courage with disgust at what he was revealing. "Mr. Stevens, you mentioned that Miss Chen was given a clean bill of health certificate for that tree. Does your wife still have a copy of that certificate?" Michael's answer landed like a bomb. "Your Honor, Karen destroyed her copy the day after we received it because it didn't support her narrative. But I kept a copy in my office files because I knew she was planning something. I also have copies of the police reports documenting her false complaints, statements from 3 other neighbors who have witnessed her harassment of Linda, and email correspondence where Karen explicitly states her intention to force Linda to sell by making her life unbearable." I brought all of it with me today because I cannot be complicit in this fraud any longer." Judge Judy accepted the additional documents Michael produced, a thick folder that represented 3 years of documented harassment and manipulation. Karen finally found her voice, standing up from her chair with her face flushed red with rage and humiliation. "How dare you?" she screamed at Michael, her voice breaking with emotion. "How dare you come here and humiliate me like this? You're supposed to be my husband. You're supposed to support me." Michael turned to face her directly, and his response was delivered with devastating calm. "I am your husband, Karen, and that's exactly why I'm doing this. Because someone has to stop you before you destroy yourself completely. Because enabling your behavior is not love, it's cowardice. And because Linda Chin deserves justice after 3 years of hell that you put her through." Karen's response was to burst into tears. But these were not tears of remorse or understanding. These were tears of rage and self-pity from someone who had finally been held accountable and could not accept the reality of her own actions. The transformation in Karen Stevens was as complete as it was instantaneous. The poised, confident woman who had walked into the courtroom an hour earlier had been replaced by a sobbing, desperate figure who seemed to be unraveling in real time before millions of viewers. Her carefully styled hair had come loose from its pins as she ran her shaking hands through it repeatedly. Her designer makeup was streaking down her face in dark rivulets, and her expensive outfit now looked like a costume she had worn to a party where she desperately did not belong. She pointed an accusing finger at Michael, her voice rising to a pitch that bordered on hysteria. "You planned this? You've been planning to humiliate me all along. This is about that paralegal at your office, isn't it? You're trying to leave me, and you thought destroying me on national television would make it easier." Judge Judy's gavel came down hard, the sharp crack of wood on wood cutting through Karen's tirade like a knife. "Sit down, Mrs. Stevens, and control yourself, or I will have you removed from this courtroom, and you will lose this case by default." Karen collapsed back into her chair, but the accusations kept pouring out between her sobs. "He's lying to you, Your Honor. He's having an affair, and he's trying to make me look bad so he can leave me and take everything. He probably put Linda up to this whole thing. They're probably working together." Michael's face remained impassive, but Judge Judy could see the pain in his eyes at his wife's desperate attempts to deflect blame onto anyone but herself. "Mrs. Stevens," Judge Judy said with ice in her voice, "your husband just committed professional suicide to tell the truth. Attorneys do not lightly testify against their spouses. The fact that he is willing to potentially face ethics complaints, damage his own reputation, and destroy his marriage tells me everything I need to know about who is telling the truth in this courtroom." Karen tried a different approach, her voice taking on a wheedling, pleading quality that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. "Your Honor, please, you have to understand. I've been under so much stress. The neighborhood, the pressure to maintain appearances, the competition with the other families. Linda's property brings down our property values. I was just trying to protect our investment. Everyone does things they regret when they're stressed." Michael doesn't understand the pressure women face in these suburban communities. Judge Judy's expression shifted from stern to absolutely withering. "Mrs. Stevens, are you seriously trying to justify 3 years of harassment, filing false police reports, and committing perjury in my courtroom by blaming suburban social pressure? Let me be absolutely clear. I don't care if you live in the most competitive neighborhood in America. I don't care if every other woman on your street drives a nicer car or has a bigger pool. None of that gives you the right to terrorize an innocent widow who just wants to live." Peacefully in the home her late husband left her, the judge turned her attention to the documents Michael had provided, reading through them with increasing severity. Her expression grew darker with each page, and the silence in the courtroom was oppressive as everyone waited for her response. Finally, she looked up, and her gaze could have melted steel. "Mrs. Stevens, I have here documented evidence of 18 separate false complaints you filed against Miss Chun over a 3-year period. I have police reports where officers explicitly warned you about filing false reports and wasting police resources. I have emails where you told your friends, and I quote, "I'm going to make that woman's life so miserable she'll beg me to buy her house." I have the arborist report clearly stating that the tree in question was healthy and posed no danger. And I have insurance documents showing that your vehicle damage was already fully compensated. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Karen's response was to dissolve into incoherent sobbing, rocking back and forth in her chair while muttering about how unfair everything was, how no one understood her side, how she was the real victim in all of this. Judge Judy let her cry for exactly 10 seconds before delivering her ruling with the force of a hammer blow. Mrs. Stevens, not only are you not getting $12,000, you are going to pay Miss Linda Chin $4,000 for her legal fees in defending this frivolous lawsuit and $4,000 for emotional distress damages resulting from your 3-year campaign of harassment. Furthermore, I am forwarding copies of all evidence presented today to the Connecticut State Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges, including perjury, filing false police reports, and harassment. Finally, I am issuing a restraining order requiring you to stay at least 500 feet away from Miss Chen and her property at all times. The gavel came down with finality, and the sound seemed to physically strike Karen. She let out a wail of anguish that would have been comedic if it weren't so pathetic, her body folding forward as if she had been punched in the stomach. "Your Honor, please, I can't pay $8,000. We don't have that kind of money. This will bankrupt us." Judge Judy's response was cold and merciless. "You found money to file this fraudulent lawsuit. You found money to maintain your luxury lifestyle while trying to destroy your neighbor's peace of mind. You will find money to pay this judgment, or Miss Chin can garnish your wages and place liens on your property. Your financial situation is not my concern. You should have thought about the consequences before you decided to weaponize the legal system against an innocent person. Case dismissed. We're done here." As the bailiff moved to escort Karen from the courtroom, she made one final attempt to reach her husband, stretching her hand toward Michael with a desperate plea. "Michael, please don't let them do this to me. We can fix this. We can make this right. Just tell them you made a mistake. Please." Michael looked at his wife with an expression that mixed pity, sadness, and resolve. "Karen, I filed for divorce this morning. My attorney already served you the papers at the house. You would have found them when you got home tonight. I'm done enabling your behavior. I'm done watching you hurt innocent people. I'm done being married to someone who has no empathy and no accountability." Karen's scream of rage and betrayal echoed through the courthouse hallways as she was led away, and the sound would become one of the most replayed audio clips in the viral video that would rack up over 30 million views in just 48 hours. The moment the courtroom doors closed behind Karen's retreating figure, something extraordinary happened that the cameras captured in perfect detail. Michael Stevens stood in the center of the courtroom looking emotionally exhausted, and Linda Chin slowly rose from her seat, her elderly frame moving with careful deliberation as she approached the man who had just sacrificed his marriage to tell the truth. The audience held its collective breath, uncertain what would happen next. But what unfolded was a moment of grace that would become almost as viral as the dramatic testimony itself. Linda reached out and took Michael's hands in hers, tears streaming down her weathered face, and she spoke words that resonated with millions of viewers. "Mr. Stevens, you didn't have to do what you did today. You could have stayed silent. You could have protected yourself, but you chose justice over comfort, and you chose truth over loyalty to someone who was doing wrong. Your integrity just restored 3 years of my faith in humanity. Thank you." Michael's composure finally cracked at those words, and tears began rolling down his cheeks as he accepted Linda's gratitude. Judge Judy watched this exchange with an expression that showed even her legendary toughness was moved by the moment. She addressed Michael directly, her voice softer than it had been throughout the entire proceeding. "Mr. Stevens, what you did today took remarkable courage. You will face consequences for this decision. Your marriage is over. Your wife will likely never forgive you. Some people will question your loyalty and your judgment. But I want you to know that you did the right thing, and that matters more than comfort or convenience. The legal profession needs more attorneys like you, people who understand that our oath to justice supersedes personal relationships when those relationships involve criminal behavior. You've shown today what integrity looks like, and I hope you're proud of that choice, even though I know it hurts." The video of Karen's meltdown and Michael's testimony exploded across social media with a velocity that stunned even experienced viral content analysts. Within 12 hours of the episode airing, clips of the courtroom drama had been viewed over 5 million times on YouTube alone. By the end of the first week, the numbers had climbed to 30 million views across all platforms, with millions of shares, comments, and reactions pouring in from every corner of the internet. The hashtag Team Michael began trending worldwide as people debated the ethics of testifying against your spouse, the nature of loyalty versus enabling, and whether Michael had done the right thing. The overwhelming consensus was that he had shown extraordinary courage, though a vocal minority argued that marriage vows should supersede legal obligations, and that Michael had betrayed his wife in the worst possible way. News outlets picked up the story with headlines that ranged from respectful to sensational. Legal ethics expert destroys wife's fraudulent lawsuit on national TV ran in legal journals. Husband chooses justice over loyalty in viral courtroom showdown appeared in mainstream media. Karen gets destroyed by her own husband, screamed from entertainment websites. The case became a cultural touchstone, referenced in late-night comedy monologues, discussed in law school ethics classes, and debated endlessly on morning talk shows. Michael was interviewed by several news programs, and he handled the attention with remarkable grace, consistently emphasizing that his decision was not about punishing Karen, but about stopping behavior that had gone too far and refusing to be complicit in fraud and harassment. The fallout in Karen and Michael's Connecticut neighborhood was swift and severe. Within days of the episode airing, 11 other families came forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation by Karen Stevens. The local newspaper ran a feature article detailing a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond Linda Chen, revealing that Karen had targeted multiple neighbors over the years for perceived slights or when she wanted something they had. One family revealed that Karen had filed false complaints with Child Protective Services, claiming neglect, leading to a traumatic investigation that ultimately cleared the parents but left lasting emotional scars. Another neighbor described how Karen had sabotaged a home sale by spreading false rumors about foundation problems to potential buyers. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had used intimidation, manipulation, and abuse of legal systems as weapons against anyone who stood in her way. The Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting where residents voted unanimously to implement new policies specifically designed to prevent the kind of harassment Karen had perpetrated. They established a review board for all complaints to ensure they had merit before proceeding, implemented penalties for filing false or malicious reports, and created a support system for residents who felt they were being unfairly targeted. The meeting minutes specifically referenced the Judge Judy case as the catalyst for these changes, and several attendees praised Michael Stevens for having the courage to expose behavior that many had witnessed but felt powerless to stop. Property values in the neighborhood actually increased in the months following Karen's departure, as the area gained a reputation for taking harassment seriously and protecting vulnerable residents. 6 months after the courtroom drama, the lives of everyone involved had been fundamentally transformed. Michael Stevens finalized his divorce from Karen, and while the process was predictably contentious, he maintained his composure and his principles throughout. His law firm, rather than censuring him for his courtroom testimony, actually promoted him to senior partner, citing his demonstration of ethical standards and integrity under pressure. The firm used his case in their recruitment materials as an example of the values they expected from their attorneys. Michael received dozens of job offers from other firms impressed by his actions, though he chose to stay with Morrison and Blake. In an interesting twist that delighted social media, Michael began dating Linda Chen's daughter, Maria, a schoolteacher who had supported her mother throughout the years of harassment. Their relationship, which began with Michael's apology and evolved into genuine friendship and eventually romance, became a symbol of how justice and healing can lead to unexpected positive outcomes. Karen Stevens faced serious consequences that extended far beyond the $8,000 judgment and the humiliation of viral infamy. The Connecticut State Attorney's Office did indeed pursue charges against her, and she ultimately accepted a plea deal that included probation, community service, mandatory counseling, and restitution payments to Linda Chen. She was forced to sell the house in the divorce settlement and relocated to a different state, where she hoped to escape the notoriety of being the most hated Karen in America. Her social media accounts, once full of carefully curated images of suburban perfection, were deleted after being flooded with thousands of critical comments. Some mental health professionals who analyzed the case suggested that Karen suffered from narcissistic personality disorder and an extreme need for control, though others cautioned against armchair diagnosis and emphasized that regardless of any underlying conditions, she remained responsible for her choices and actions. Linda Chen used the $8,000 she received from the judgment to make improvements to her beloved home and garden, the property that represented her last connection to her late husband. She planted new flowers in his memory and installed a small memorial bench where she could sit and remember happier times. She became something of a local celebrity, known for her grace and forgiveness even in the face of years of torment. She declined most interview requests, preferring to let her quiet dignity speak for itself. But she did agree to one television interview where she emphasized that she hoped Karen would eventually find peace and understanding. Though that forgiveness did not mean forgetting or excusing the harm that had been done, Linda became president of the Neighborhood Association, where she worked to create a culture of kindness and mutual respect that would prevent future harassment. The case became required viewing in several law school ethics courses, used as an example of the difficult choices attorneys sometimes face when personal relationships conflict with professional obligations. Professor Margaret Williams at Yale Law School incorporated the case into her curriculum, telling her students that Michael Stevens had demonstrated the kind of moral courage that the legal profession desperately needed. She emphasized that being an attorney meant sometimes making choices that destroyed relationships but protected the integrity of the justice system. The case sparked broader conversations about enabling behavior, the difference between loyalty and complicity, and the courage required to hold loved ones accountable when they cross moral and legal lines. Mental health professionals discuss the psychology of entitlement and how enabling can actually harm the person being enabled by preventing them from facing necessary consequences. If this story of courage, justice, and accountability moved you, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because the battle against entitled behavior and the celebration of integrity is just beginning. Comment below and tell me whether you think Michael did the right thing, whether you could make the same choice in his position, and share your own stories of times when you had to choose between loyalty and doing what was right. Smash that like button if you believe that real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their actions, and that enabling harm is not the same as supporting someone you care about. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another case where justice prevails and entitled behavior gets exactly what it deserves. Share this video with someone who needs to see what real integrity looks like. And remember that in the end, the truth always matters more than comfort. Justice always matters more than convenience, and having the courage to stand up for what's right is always worth the cost. Next week, we have an even more shocking case where a father testifies against his own son in a fraud case. And what he reveals will leave you absolutely speechless. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember that accountability is not cruelty. Truth is not betrayal. And sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to protect someone from the reality of who they've become. See you in the next one. The television courtroom had never witnessed such a perfect storm of arrogance meeting accountability. Karen Mitchell, a 45-year-old self-proclaimed social media influencer with perfectly highlighted hair and a designer outfit that screamed desperate relevance, sat in the defendant's chair with the kind of smug superiority that could only come from years of bullying service workers and demanding to speak to managers. Her manicured fingers scrolled through her phone even as the bailiff called the court to order, completely oblivious to the fact that she was about to experience the most humiliating 8 minutes of her entire life. Tadesat. What started as a simple small claims dispute over an unpaid photography bill was about to explode into the most viral courtroom moment in television history. And Karen had no idea that her own husband's text messages were sitting in a folder on Judge Judy's bench, ready to destroy everything she had built her fake influencer life upon. Judge Judy Scheindlin sat behind her bench with the calm confidence of someone who had crushed entitled people for breakfast every day for the past 25 years. At 78 years old, she possessed the kind of sharp legal mind and zero-tolerance attitude that had made her a cultural icon and America's favorite dispenser of courtroom justice. She had reviewed this case file 3 times the night before, and her experienced eye had caught something that made her smile with anticipation. Karen Mitchell wasn't just another entitled defendant trying to skip out on paying for services. She was a fraud, a liar, and someone whose digital footprint told a story that would make even the most jaded court observers gasp in disbelief. Judge Judy had been waiting for the perfect moment to teach America a lesson about respect, about the dangers of fake influencer culture, and about why you should never underestimate someone based on their age. Today was that day. The plaintiff, Jessica Romano, sat nervously clutching a folder full of contracts, emails, and printed Instagram posts. At 28 years old, she had poured her heart and soul into building her photography business from nothing, working double shifts as a waitress while shooting weddings and events on weekends. She was a single mother to a 6-year-old daughter, and the $3,200 that Karen Mitchell owed her represented more than just payment for services. It represented rent money, grocery money, and the difference between keeping her dream alive or losing everything she had worked for. Jessica had spent 12 exhausting hours at Karen's daughter's Sweet 16 party, capturing over 500 beautifully edited photographs that Karen had immediately posted across all her social media platforms, gushing about how perfect they were and tagging Jessica's business with heart emojis and praise. Then, 3 days later, Karen had sent a cold email refusing payment and claiming the photos were unprofessional garbage that had damaged her brand. Jessica had begged, pleaded, and tried to reason with Karen for 2 months before finally scraping together enough money to file this lawsuit. She had no idea she was about to be vindicated in the most spectacular way imaginable. Before we show you the exact moment when Karen made the fatal mistake of mocking Judge Judy's age, before we reveal the devastating text messages that exposed her fraud and destroyed her marriage on national television, you need to hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to witness will restore your faith in justice and prove that karma is not only real, but has perfect timing. Make sure to comment below where you're watching from, because I love seeing my viewers from around the world. And smash that like button if you believe that age-shaming someone is never okay, and that fake influencers need to be exposed for the frauds they really are. This isn't just another courtroom case. This is a masterclass in why you should never disrespect Judge Judy, why text messages can absolutely destroy your life in court, and why building your entire existence on Instagram lies will eventually catch up with you in the most public and humiliating way possible. Trust me, the moment when those text messages appear on the courtroom screen, and Karen realizes that her husband, her affair, and her entire fake life are about to be exposed to millions of viewers, is something you will never forget. The case seemed simple enough on the surface, the kind of dispute that Judge Judy could resolve in 15 minutes, before moving on to the next entitled person who needed a reality check. Karen Mitchell was being sued by Jessica Romano for breach of contract and refusal to pay for photography services rendered at a Sweet 16 party. The paperwork showed a signed contract for $3,200, proof of services delivered, and Karen's social media posts using those exact photographs she now claimed were worthless. Judge Judy had seen 1,000 cases just like this. Small business owners getting stiffed by entitled clients who thought contracts were suggestions rather than legal obligations. But what made this case special? What made Judge Judy's eyes narrow with that predatory focus that regular viewers knew meant someone was about to be absolutely destroyed was the additional evidence submitted during discovery. Text messages between Karen and her husband, bank records showing financial desperation hidden behind an Instagram facade of wealth, and a pattern of behavior revealing that Karen Mitchell wasn't just another deadbeat client. She was a calculating fraud who had planned from the beginning to steal Jessica's work and her payment. Judge Judy opened the proceedings with her signature no-nonsense approach, her voice cutting through the courtroom with the authority of someone who had presided over 20,000 cases and had absolutely no patience for nonsense. "Ms. Mitchell," she began, "you're being sued by Ms. Romano for—" Judge Judy looked directly at Karen Mitchell. "Ms. Mitchell, you're being sued by Ms. Romano for $3,200 for photography services you contracted and received but refused to pay for. Tell me why you believe you don't owe this money." It was a simple, straightforward question that any reasonable person would answer with facts and evidence. But Karen Mitchell was not a reasonable person, and her response would immediately signal to everyone in that courtroom that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Karen leaned back in her chair with theatrical confidence, flipping her highlighted hair over her shoulder, like she was posing for an Instagram story, rather than defending herself in a legal proceeding. "Your Honor, I run a very successful lifestyle and mommy blog with over 47,000 Instagram followers, and my brand is built on aesthetic perfection and aspirational content. The photos Ms. Romano delivered were completely unusable for my platform. They made my daughter look basic. The lighting was amateur at best, and honestly, I couldn't post 90% of them without damaging my carefully curated feed and losing followers." Judge Judy's eyebrows raised slightly, that first warning sign viewers recognized as the calm before the storm. "Ms. Mitchell, did you or did you not sign a contract agreeing to pay Ms. Romano $3,200 for 12 hours of photography coverage at your daughter's party?" Karen waved her hand dismissively, as if the concept of legally binding contracts was beneath her consideration. "Well, yes, technically, I signed something, but that was before I realized she wasn't capable of delivering Instagram-quality content. I have standards, Your Honor. My followers expect a certain level of excellence, and I can't compromise my brand just because I signed a piece of paper." The audience murmured with disapproval, but Karen seemed to interpret their reaction as jealousy rather than disgust. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on that dangerous edge that made attorneys break out in cold sweats. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm looking at evidence submitted by Ms. Romano that shows you posted over 200 of these allegedly unusable photos to your Instagram account within hours of receiving them. You tagged Ms. Romano's business, wrote glowing captions about how perfect the photos were, and used heart emojis and 5-star ratings. Would you like to explain that contradiction? Karen's confident facade cracked slightly, but she recovered quickly, with the kind of shameless pivoting that only truly entitled people can pull off without flinching. Well, Your Honor, I posted those initially because I didn't want to be rude. But then, when I really examined them closely and showed them to other influencers in my network, we all agreed they weren't up to professional standards. I was just being nice at first, but business is business, and I can't pay for subpar work just to spare someone's feelings. Jessica Romano's hands clenched into fists as she listened to Karen rewrite history with such casual dishonesty. Judge Judy pulled out another document from her file, her expression revealing nothing but her tone conveying everything. So, you posted them, praised them publicly, used them to generate engagement for your account, and then decided they were worthless only after Ms. Romano asked for payment? Karen shrugged with infuriating nonchalance. Like I said, I was being polite initially, but when it came time to actually pay, I realized I couldn't in good conscience reward mediocre work. It would go against everything my brand stands for. Judge Judy's patience was clearly wearing thin, and she shifted her line of questioning in a way that made Karen visibly uncomfortable. Ms. Mitchell, let's talk about your qualifications to judge professional photography. What exactly makes you an expert in photographic quality? Karen sat up straighter, clearly believing this was her moment to shine and educate this old judge about the modern digital world. Your Honor, with all due respect, I have 47,000 Instagram followers. I've been building my brand for 3 years. I understand composition, lighting, aesthetic appeal, and what resonates with audiences in the social media space. I think my follower count speaks for itself about my expertise in visual content. Judge Judy nodded slowly as if considering this explanation, and then delivered the question that would begin Karen's unraveling. So your expertise comes from Instagram followers. That's your professional qualification? Karen nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the trap being set. Exactly. In today's digital age, social media success is the ultimate credential. Traditional photography education is honestly kind of outdated compared to understanding what actually performs well on Instagram and TikTok. The moment had arrived, the point of no return, where Karen's arrogance would collide with Judge Judy's authority in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Judge Judy pulled out Karen's signed contract and began reading the terms aloud, her voice emphasizing every legal obligation that Karen had agreed to and then violated. Ms. Mitchell, this contract clearly states that you agreed to pay the full amount upon delivery of edited digital photographs within 2 weeks of the event. Ms. Romano delivered 512 edited photographs in 10. Ms. Mitchell, this contract clearly states that you agreed to pay the full amount upon delivery of edited digital photographs within 2 weeks of the event. Ms. Romano delivered 512 edited photographs in 10 days. You acknowledged receipt. You used the photographs extensively on your social media platforms. By any legal standard, you owe this payment. There is no clause in this contract about Instagram worthiness or follower approval. You received exactly what you contracted for, and you owe exactly what you agreed to pay. The logic was irrefutable. The law was crystal clear. Any reasonable person would have accepted defeat and agreed to pay what they owed. But Karen Mitchell's entitlement ran deeper than reason or law. What came out of her mouth next would seal her fate and create the most viral courtroom moment in television history. Karen let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind reserved for dealing with customer service representatives who just don't understand. Then she said the words that would haunt her forever. Look, Your Honor, no offense, but maybe if you were more in touch with modern social media standards instead of being stuck in, Like the 1950s or whenever you grew up, you'd understand why these photos are unusable. You're obviously too old to get how Instagram works or what quality content actually looks like in today's digital landscape. I'm not trying to be rude, but your generation just doesn't understand influencer culture and brand management. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the court stenographer froze, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. The audience gasped. Jessica Romano's mouth fell open in shock, and even the bailiff, who had seen everything, shifted uncomfortably. Karen sat with a self-satisfied smirk, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just committed professional suicide and lit the fuse on a bomb that would detonate her entire reputation. Judge Judy's expression changed in real time. Her eyes hardened, her posture straightened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The infamous death stare had arrived. The one that every regular viewer knew meant someone was about to be annihilated. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice dangerously calm. "Excuse me, Ms. Mitchell, would you like to repeat what you just said?" For a fleeting second, Karen seemed to sense that she'd crossed a line. But her arrogance won the battle against common sense. Instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "I'm just saying, Your Honor, and I mean this with all due respect, but you're what, 80-something? You probably don't even have Instagram. How can you possibly understand the standards of modern influencer photography when you're from a completely different generation? No offense, but the world has changed a lot since you were practicing law, and social media has created new standards for visual content that traditional legal frameworks just don't account for." The audacity was breathtaking. The sheer stupidity of insulting a sitting judge's age and competence while trying to justify stealing $3,200 from a struggling single mother was almost impressive in its lack of self-awareness. Judge Judy sat perfectly still for 3 long seconds. Those familiar with her show knew this wasn't hesitation. It was the calm before an absolutely devastating storm. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades on the bench and the authority of someone who had heard every kind of nonsense imaginable. "Ms. Mitchell, I am 78 years old. I have been practicing law since 1965, which means I've been an attorney for longer than you've been alive. I presided over more than 20,000 cases as a family court judge in Manhattan before my television career. I have forgotten more about contract law, evidence, and human behavior than you will ever pretend to know. But thank you for that fascinating assessment of my competence based on my age. It's been very illuminating." Karen's face finally faltered, her flawless foundation doing nothing to hide the color draining from her cheeks. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that mocking Judge Judy's intelligence might not have been a wise choice, but the destruction had only just begun. "Now, Ms. Mitchell," Judge Judy continued, opening a thick folder that had been sitting quietly on her bench. "Let's talk about your 47,000 Instagram followers and your supposed expertise in social media, shall we?" Karen's eyes widened slightly as she recognized that this wasn't an ordinary case file. It was a dossier, meticulous research, compiled evidence, and a detailed look into her carefully constructed life of lies. "According to the analysis conducted by my research team," Judge Judy began, "approximately 35,000 of your 47,000 Instagram followers were purchased from bot farms and fake account generators. Your engagement rate is 0.3%, which any actual social media expert would tell you indicates fraudulent follower inflation. Your most popular post in the last 6 months received exactly 142 genuine interactions, and 60% of those came from accounts that also appeared to be purchased bots." The color drained completely from Karen's face as Judge Judy continued her methodical dismantling of every lie Karen had built her identity upon. "Furthermore, Ms. Mitchell," Judy went on, Your so-called successful lifestyle and mommy blog generates approximately $200 per month in actual revenue, mostly from affiliate links that your fake followers never click on. You are not a successful influencer. You are not a brand. You are a fraud who bought fake followers to create an illusion of success. And now you're using that illusion to justify stealing from a real working photographer who actually earned her skills and reputation through talent and hard work, rather than credit card purchases and bot farms. Karen tried to speak, her voice emerging as a strangled whisper. Your Honor, that's private information. You can't just investigate my social media accounts and finances without my permission. That's an invasion of privacy and has nothing to do with this case. Judge Judy's smile turned predatory. When you come into my courtroom, mock my age, question my competence, and attempt to justify fraud by claiming expertise you don't possess. I do my homework, Ms. Mitchell. Everything I just described is publicly available information to anyone with basic internet, research skills, and the motivation to look beyond your carefully filtered Instagram facade. And it has everything to do with this case, because it establishes that you are a habitual liar who has built an entire fake existence on social media. Fraud. She paused, then leaned forward slightly. But here's what's really interesting about your financial situation. Ms. Mitchell, this is where we get to the heart of why you truly refused to pay Ms. Romano. Judge Judy picked up another folder. Bank statements and credit card records that painted a different picture of Karen's influencer lifestyle. Your checking account currently has $842 in it. Your savings account has been empty for 6 months. You have over $60,000 in credit card debt spread across 7 different cards, most of it spent maintaining the appearance of wealth for your social media content. You lease your luxury car, you rent your apartment, and you finance every designer item you own on credit cards that you're 3 months behind on paying. The courtroom was silent. You don't have money to pay Ms. Romano, Judy continued, because you've spent years living beyond your means to maintain an Instagram illusion of success while drowning in debt. But that's still not the most interesting part of this case. Her tone sharpened. The most interesting part is what my investigators discovered when they subpoenaed your phone records as part of the evidence discovery process. Karen's entire body went rigid. Her hands clutched the edge of the defendant's table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Judge Judy held up a phone, Karen's phone, submitted as evidence and examined by the court. These text messages between you and your husband, David Mitchell, exchanged during your daughter's Sweet 16 party while Ms. Romano was working, tell a very different story about why you refused payment. A story about fraud, conspiracy, and premeditated theft that goes far beyond a simple contract dispute. Karen Mitchell's world began to crumble in real time as Judge Judy held up the phone like a prosecutor revealing a murder weapon. The confidence that had carried her through years of scamming small business owners evaporated instantly, replaced by raw panic visible in every muscle of her face. Your Honor, those are private marital communications between me and my husband, she stammered, her voice rising in desperation. You can't just read our personal text messages in open court. That's a violation of privacy laws. It has nothing to do with a photography contract dispute. Judge Judy's response was swift and merciless, every word precise. Ms. Mitchell, these text messages were legally subpoenaed as part of the discovery process in this case. Your lawyer had every opportunity to object during pretrial proceedings and chose not to. That means they are now admissible evidence, and they have everything to do with this case, because they establish premeditation, intent to commit fraud, and a conspiracy between you and your husband to deliberately steal Ms. Romano's services and payment. Judy looked directly at Karen, her expression a perfect balance of disappointment and disgust. "Ms. Mitchell, is your husband, David, in the courtroom today?" The camera panned to the back row, where a middle-aged man in a business suit sat looking like he wished he could disappear into the floor. David Mitchell's face was ashen, his eyes darting between his wife and the exits as he realized that whatever was about to happen next, he couldn't stop it. Karen's voice came out as barely a whisper when she answered, "Yes, he's here, but I don't understand why that matters, or what this has to do with anything." Judge Judy's smile held no warmth, only the satisfaction of someone who had cornered a liar with irrefutable evidence. "Oh, I think you understand perfectly, Ms. Mitchell. I think you know exactly what I'm about to show this courtroom. And I think you've been dreading this moment since the day you were notified that your phone records had been subpoenaed." She turned toward the evidence file and continued, her voice steady and clear. These messages were exchanged between Karen Mitchell and David Mitchell on the evening of their daughter's Sweet 16 party, while Ms. Romano was actively working and photographing the event. She held up the printed text exchange for the court to see. The first message was sent by David Mitchell at 9:47 p.m. "Is the photographer still there? We need to talk about Marcus." Judge Judy paused, letting that single name, Marcus, hang in the air like a grenade. Karen's reply followed at 9:52 p.m. "Yes, she's everywhere. Can't talk now. Marcus is getting impatient about the condo." The courtroom erupted in low murmurs as the audience began to piece together what these messages implied. Judge Judy raised her hand for silence. She continued reading. David's response at 9:55 p.m. "Tell your boyfriend to wait. We close on the condo next week. Then you can leave. And I keep the house." Gasps echoed through the room. Jessica Romano's eyes widened as she realized this case was about to expose far more than an unpaid photography bill. Karen Mitchell's face went from pale to ghostly white. Her lips moved soundlessly as Judge Judy pressed forward, each word slicing through the tension like a blade. "So let me understand this correctly, Ms. Mitchell," the judge began. "While Ms. Romano was working your daughter's birthday party, capturing what should have been a cherished family moment, you and your husband were texting about your boyfriend Marcus and your plans to divorce. You were discussing real estate deals and custody arrangements while pretending to be a happy family for Instagram photos." Karen tried to respond but could only produce a choked sound, somewhere between denial and panic. "Oh, there's much more context here, Ms. Mitchell," Judge Judy continued, her tone sharpening. "Much more." She turned another page in the evidence file. The next series of text messages reveals exactly why you refused to pay Ms. Romano, and exposes the premeditated fraud that brought us all here today. The courtroom fell silent again. Karen Mitchell to David Mitchell at 10:15 p.m. "We're already over budget for this party, so we can't pay the photographer full amount." David's reply at 10:18 p.m. "Just refuse payment. Claim she did bad work. We need that $3,200 for your condo deposit with Marcus." Karen's next message at 10:21 p.m. "Good idea. I'll post the photos first so she can't claim I didn't use them, then refuse to pay." And finally, David's response at 10:23 p.m. "Perfect. She's just some struggling photographer. She won't have money to sue." The courtroom exploded into chaos as the full extent of the Mitchells' deception became clear. They had planned from the very beginning to steal Jessica Romano's work and withhold payment, discussing their scheme in real time while she worked tirelessly through a 12-hour event. Jessica burst into tears, rage, vindication, and relief mixing together, finally understanding that she had never done anything wrong. The photos were never the issue. She had been targeted, exploited by two people who conspired to steal her livelihood to fund an extramarital affair, and a secret condo purchase. Judge Judy allowed the uproar to continue for a few moments before striking her gavel, sharply for silence. "This is premeditated fraud. Ms. Mitchell," she declared, "you didn't refuse payment because of photo quality. You refused payment because you and your husband conspired to steal that money to fund your affair and your divorce plans. You posted the photos to your Instagram, praised them publicly, generated engagement and income for your fake influencer brand, and then deliberately refused payment as part of a calculated scheme. To be revealed was going to destroy more than just this court case." Karen's voice came out as barely a whisper when she answered, "Yes, he's here, but I don't understand why that matters, or what this has to do with anything." Judge Judy's smile held no warmth, only the satisfaction of someone who had cornered a liar with irrefutable evidence. "Oh, I think you understand perfectly, Miss Mitchell. I think you know exactly what I'm about to show this courtroom. And I think you've been dreading this moment since you received notice that your phone records have been subpoenaed." Before we continue with the most explosive text message revelation in courtroom history, if you're loving watching this fake influencer get completely exposed by Judge Judy, you need to smash that like button right now and let me know in the comments what you think should happen to people who deliberately plan to steal from small business owners. Hit that subscribe button because what Judge Judy is about to read will absolutely shock you and prove that text messages can destroy your entire life in less than 5 minutes. Comment "Justice served" if you think Karen is getting exactly what she deserves for her age-shaming disrespect and her fraudulent lifestyle. Trust me, what happens next will restore your faith that karma is real and consequences are inevitable when you mess with the wrong judge. Judge Judy began reading the text messages aloud, her voice steady and clear, ensuring that every word was captured by the courtroom microphones and heard by millions of viewers who would share this moment across every social media platform imaginable. These messages were exchanged between Karen Mitchell and David Mitchell on the evening of the Sweet 16 party, while Miss Romano was actively working and photographing the event. The first message was sent by David Mitchell at 9:47 p.m. "Is the photographer still there? We need to talk about Marcus." Judge Judy paused, letting that name hang in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Karen's response came at 9:52 p.m. "Yes. She's everywhere. Can't talk now. Marcus is getting impatient about the condo." The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the audience began processing what these messages implied. Judge Judy raised her hand for silence and continued reading. David's response at 9:55 p.m. "Tell your boyfriend to wait. We close on the condo next week. Then you can leave, and I keep the house." The gasps from the audience were audible, and Jessica Romano's eyes went wide with shock as she realized this case was about to reveal far more than a simple contract dispute. Karen Mitchell's face had gone from pale to absolutely ghostly white, and she seemed unable to form words as Judge Judy continued her methodical destruction. "So, let me understand this correctly, Miss Mitchell. While Miss Romano was working your daughter's party, capturing memories of what should have been a special family moment, you and your husband were texting about your boyfriend Marcus and your plans to divorce. You were discussing real estate transactions and custody arrangements while pretending to be a happy family for Instagram photos." Karen tried to speak, but only managed to produce incoherent sounds of protest. Judge Judy was not finished. Not even close. "Oh, there's much more context here, Miss Mitchell. Much more. The next series of text messages reveals exactly why you refused to pay Miss Romano and exposes the premeditated fraud that brought us here today, Judge." Judy's voice took on an even harder edge as she read the next exchange. Karen Mitchell to David Mitchell at 10:15 p.m. We're already over budget for this party, so we can't pay the photographer full amount. David's response at 10:18 p.m. Just refuse payment. Claim she did bad work. We need that $3,200 for your condo deposit with Marcus. Karen's reply at 10:21 p.m. Good idea. I'll post the photos first so she can't claim I didn't use them, then refuse to pay. And finally, David's message at 10:23 p.m. Perfect. She's just some struggling photographer. She won't have money to sue. The courtroom exploded into chaos as the full scope of Karen and David's conspiracy became clear. They had planned from the very beginning to steal Jessica's work and her payment, discussing their fraud in real time while Jessica worked 12 exhausting hours to capture their daughter's party. Jessica Romano burst into tears, vindication and rage, mixing together as she finally understood that she hadn't done anything wrong, that the photos had never been the problem, that she had been targeted and victimized by two calculating fraudsters who had conspired to steal her livelihood to fund an extramarital affair and a secret real estate transaction. Judge Judy allowed the courtroom noise to continue for several seconds before gabling for order, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority. This is premeditated fraud, Miss Mitchell. You didn't refuse payment because of photo quality. You refused payment because you and your husband conspired to steal that money to fund your affair and your divorce plans. You posted the photos to your Instagram. You praised them publicly. You generated engagement and content for your fake influencer brand. And then you deliberately refused payment as part of a calculated scheme that you and your husband planned via text message while Miss Romano was still working in your home. Karen finally found her voice, though it came out as a desperate, pleading whine that bore no resemblance to her earlier arrogance. Your Honor, please. This is a private matter between me and my husband. It has nothing to do with the photography contract. We were just having marital problems and making poor decisions, but that doesn't mean I committed fraud. Judge Judy's laugh was cold and utterly devoid of humor. Poor decisions? You plan to steal $3,200 from a single mother to fund your boyfriend's condo deposit. That's not a poor decision, Miss Mitchell. That's a crime. Judge Judy was far from finished with her systematic destruction of Karen Mitchell's lies, and the next set of text messages would reveal that the fraud and conspiracy went even deeper than anyone in that courtroom had imagined. But before we get to those messages, Miss Mitchell, I want to address something you said earlier about my age and my inability to understand modern social media culture. Judge Judy's voice dripped with contempt as she held up her own phone, showing it to the courtroom cameras. I do have Instagram, Miss Mitchell. I have 2.3 million real, verified, organic followers who will be very interested in watching this episode when it airs. My engagement rate is 12%, which any actual social media expert would tell you is exceptionally high and indicates a genuine engaged audience. Unlike your purchased bots and fake followers, my audience actually exists and actually cares about content. So perhaps before you mock someone's age and technological competence, you should make sure you're not a complete fraud whose entire digital existence is built on lies and credit card purchases. The humiliation on Karen's face was absolute and devastating, but Judge Judy had not yet delivered the final blow that would completely shatter whatever remained of Karen's carefully constructed facade. There are more text messages, Miss Mitchell, and these ones reveal that your marriage isn't just ending. It's been a complete sham for quite some time. Judge Judy read the next exchange with clinical detachment. David Mitchell to Karen Mitchell at 11:03 p.m. Once the photographer is gone, remind me we need to talk about custody. You get Amanda on weekends. I keep primary custody. Deal. Karen's response at 11:07 p.m. Fine. As long as Marcus and I get the condo. You can have your little secretary at the house. And David's final message of the evening at 11:12 p.m. She's not my secretary anymore. She's my fiancée now. Stop being bitter about it. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as the full picture emerged. Karen and David Mitchell were both having affairs, both planning their divorce, both using their daughter's Sweet 16 party as cover while texting their affair partners and negotiating custody and asset division. And in the middle of their collapsing marriage and mutual betrayal, they had found time to conspire together to defraud Jessica Romano of her payment to fund their separate romantic escapes. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, surveying Karen with the kind of disgusted fascination normally reserved for particularly interesting specimens of toxic waste. So, Miss Mitchell, you're not just a fraud and a thief. You and your husband are conducting a fake marriage while both carrying on affairs, using your daughter's milestone celebration as an opportunity to text your respective lovers, and finding common ground only in your conspiracy to steal from the woman you hired to document this travesty of family values. And you had the audacity, the sheer unmitigated gall, to come into my courtroom and mock my age while lecturing me about standards and professionalism. Karen tried one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her exposure. Your Honor, my personal life, my marriage problems, they don't change the fact that I had legitimate concerns about the photo quality. And you can't just ignore my complaints because you don't like my relationship choices. Judge Judy's response was immediate and brutal. Your complaints about photo quality were fabricated lies created to justify theft. You posted over 200 of Miss Romano's photos within hours of receiving them. You praised them publicly. You used them to generate content and engagement for your fraudulent influencer account. The only thing illegitimate here is you, your fake followers, your fake marriage, and your completely transparent attempt to steal from a woman who trusted you with a signed contract. The verdict came swift and devastating, delivered with the finality of a guillotine blade. Miss Mitchell, you are a liar, a fraud, and a thief who conspired with your husband to deliberately steal payment from Miss Romano while she worked in good faith to provide services you contracted and received. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $3,200 for the original contract amount, plus $2,000 in court costs, plus an additional $3,000 in punitive damages for fraud, emotional distress, and the sheer audacity of your premeditated conspiracy to commit theft. Total judgment $8,200 payable immediately. Furthermore, I am recommending that these text messages and this case file be forwarded to the district attorney's office for review of possible criminal fraud charges. Your fake influencer career is over. Your credibility is destroyed, and your marriage was apparently already dead before you walked into my courtroom. So, at least you can't blame me for that disaster. Karen Mitchell collapsed into her chair as if all the bones had been removed from her body. Her designer handbag fell to the floor as she buried her face in her hands and began sobbing uncontrollably. The transformation from smug, arrogant influencer to completely destroyed woman took less than 30 seconds, and the cameras captured every moment of her breakdown. Judge Judy delivered her final statement with cold satisfaction. And Miss Mitchell, one more thing. For the record, I may be 78 years old, but I still have enough mental capacity to recognize a fraud when I see one, to read text messages that prove conspiracy and intent, and to deliver justice to people who think their age, their follower count, or their fake Instagram lifestyle makes them untouchable. Age brings experience, wisdom, and the ability to see through people like you in about 30 seconds. Perhaps you'll remember that the next time you consider mocking someone for being older than you. Case dismissed. Get out of my courtroom. The gavel came down with absolute finality, and Karen was escorted out of the courtroom still sobbing, her mascara running in dark streams down her face, her carefully curated image destroyed as thoroughly as her fraudulent marriage and fake influencer career. David Mitchell had already disappeared from the courtroom, apparently deciding that avoiding cameras was more important than supporting his soon-to-be ex-wife through her public humiliation. Jessica Romano sat in stunned relief, tears of vindication streaming down her face as she realized she would finally be paid, and that the woman who had tried to destroy her business and her life had been exposed as a complete fraud on national television. The aftermath was swift and merciless in its totality. Within 2 hours of the episode airing, Karen's Instagram account was flooded with thousands of comments calling her a fraud and a thief before she finally deleted it entirely. Her mommy blog was taken down within 24 hours. David Mitchell filed for divorce 3 days later, citing irreconcilable differences and attaching the courtroom text messages as evidence of infidelity and fraud. Marcus, the mysterious boyfriend who had been so impatient about his condo, apparently vanished from Karen's life the moment she could no longer afford to fund his real estate dreams. The video of Karen mocking Judge Judy's age, followed by the devastating text message revelation, went viral across every social media platform imaginable, accumulating over 50 million views in the first week alone. TikTok users created reaction videos. Twitter exploded with hashtags like "PD Karen got judged," "Respect your elders," and "Her text messages never lie." Legal experts used the case as a teaching example of how digital evidence can destroy fraudulent claims in court. Social media analysts dissected Karen's fake follower fraud as a cautionary tale about influencer culture. Relationship counselors discussed the toxic dynamic of Karen and David's conspiracy as an example of how marriages can become partnerships in crime rather than love. Jessica Romano's photography business exploded with supportive bookings from people who had seen the episode and wanted to support a small business owner who had stood up to fraud. She was featured on local news programs, interviewed on podcasts about small business rights, and became an advocate for other photographers and service providers who had been victimized by clients who refused payment. She started a foundation to provide legal support for small business owners fighting contract fraud, using her settlement money from Karen to help others who couldn't afford to sue. Karen Mitchell's life was comprehensively destroyed by her own arrogance, her text messages, and her fatal decision to mock Judge Judy's age on national television. She lost her Instagram career, her marriage, her boyfriend, her credibility, and $200 she didn't have. She became permanently infamous as the woman who thought she was too smart for consequences, who believed her fake followers, made her an expert, and who learned the hardest way possible that text messages are forever, and respect matters more than engagement rates. If you believe Karen Mitchell got exactly what she deserved for mocking Judge Judy's age and conspiring to commit fraud, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss more cases where entitled people learn that actions have consequences and that Judge Judy always delivers justice.